Stepping away from the world of earthly battles and meticulously documented historical events, our narrative ascends to heights inaccessible to mere mortals. We won't speak of fleeting kingdoms, but of the shining abode of the gods, sacred Olympus, where every breath is filled with the scent of ambrosia, and the celestial curls of clouds seem to conceal countless divine intrigues. The gods, whose statues radiate majesty and serenity, were in reality far more tumultuous and unpredictable beings than commonly believed. In this deep dive into ancient myths, a certain universal comfort is found, for the stories passed down through generations continue to captivate minds, offering a glimpse into the true nature of the Olympian deities. The narrative, as is often the case with great tales, begins against the backdrop of a majestic mountain, bathed in the rays of the setting sun. This is not just any peak, but Mount Olympus itself, the famed dwelling of the gods. Here on its slopes clouds gather like the luxurious draperies of a celestial palace, and the air is filled with the delicate aroma of ambrosia. At times, through this divine grace, faint scents of burning offerings from the mortal world, stretching far below, can be detected. Grand and regal, it rises on the northern borders of ancient Greece. Its summit, so often shrouded in mist and clouds, has for centuries fostered the natural assumption of powerful entities residing there. Remarkably, Olympus is a very real geographical point, the highest peak in Greece, reaching nearly 3,000 meters above sea level. However, for the ancient Hellenes, it represented something far greater than just a cluster of rocks and mountain ridges. For them, it was a sacred geography, a celestial hub of unshakable power, perpetually enveloped in the interplay of light and shadow, and an eternal, vigilant silence. They perceived it not as an object to be conquered, but as a sanctuary worthy of worship, a divine hall where only the most chosen and mighty beings resided. And these inhabitants are the Olympians. Their number traditionally totals 12 gods and goddesses, though the exact composition could vary depending on the specific myth and the generosity of whoever was determining their presence at the divine table. Together they formed the unshakable core of the ancient Greek pantheon. Capricious and passionate beings, boisterous in their decisions and at times petty in their desires, yet invariably brilliant in their divine essence. They were worshipped with reverence, feared and, notably, gossiped about for centuries. In a sense, they were like the most powerful celebrities. If those celebrities could command the elements, hurl lightning bolts, and effortlessly transform undesirable mortals into olive trees. However, before we proceed to individual introductions to each of these mighty deities, it is worth pausing and gazing into the very atmosphere of their majestic world. For on Olympus, it is always twilight, that magical hour when the golden light softly fades behind the marble colonnades, and it is then that the grand divine feasts begin. One can imagine immense halls, gleaming with polished stone, where in the distance the soft strains of lyres can be heard, and long tables groan under the weight of unimaginable delicacies. Exotic fruits, cheeses aged, it would seem, by the very winds of prophecy, and wine of such potency that it could make even the most hardened satyr weep tears of pure, unbridled joy. This place was absolutely not intended for staid moderation or tedious piety. Olympus, as it appeared in ancient myths, was a vibrant, divine, and at times astonishingly chaotic world. It resembled a grand yet highly dysfunctional family gathering, where ordinary human passions and dramas were amplified by immortality and the presence of magical beings. Here, someone was always enthusiastically playing the harp, while another would inevitably make a dramatic exit, challenging for everyone's attention. Those who envision marble floors and elegant Ionic columns are not far from the truth, but one should not expect a meticulously catalogued plan of a palace complex. Early Greek poets such as Homer and Hesiod described gleaming halls and gates woven from clouds, but they were not architectural draftsmen capable of detailing every arch and portico. What has reached us is more a hint of boundless beauty, the shimmer of exotic materials, and a sense of eternal, unwavering comfort. Their descriptions paint halls of bronze and gold, courtyards seemingly paved with sunlight itself, feasts that seemed to never end, and fountains from which flowed not just water, but melodic song. It was less a building and more an embodiment of a celestial, ethereal atmosphere. And of course, what truly good atmosphere could do without an exquisite menu? It should be noted that the gods dined with great refinement. Their diet consisted primarily of two sacred elements, ambrosia and nectar. And of course, these divine gifts had nothing in common with earthly delicacies or trendy establishments. Ambrosia, according to tradition, was the food that bestowed immortality. Its taste was described differently in various sources. Some spoke of honeyed bread, others of a fragrant perfume that was consumed by the very essence of the being, which admittedly sounds more like a beauty ritual than a culinary delight. Nectar, its liquid companion, flowed like liquid sunlight in golden goblets, sustaining all the celestials in an eternally divine state of health, unfading youth, and quite likely, a light, pleasant intoxication. The gods knew no old age, suffered no illnesses, and were spared the mundane humiliations of mortal life, unless one counts the emotional outbursts, which they had in abundance. However, even a divine lifestyle filled with luxury and power was not without certain responsibilities. Each god had, so to speak, their own sphere of influence and assigned functions. Zeus, for example, was occupied with managing thunderstorms, establishing laws, and, incidentally, was quite active in matters of infidelity. Poseidon reigned over the raging seas, earth-shattering earthquakes, and his perpetually quarrelsome trident. Athena was responsible for wisdom, sophisticated military strategy, and often gazed grimly at the world from behind her trusty shield. Each Olympian possessed their unique area of responsibility, and while some took their roles with utmost seriousness, others readily used them as convenient pretexts for interfering in mortal fates, or even skipping important divine assemblies. Altogether, it's easy to imagine that a typical day on Olympus involved a good deal of sitting majestically and looking omnipotent, which, to be fair, was probably true, but it also meant constantly making fateful decisions. Would a hero succeed in his daring feat? Would a city be blessed with life-giving rain or forever buried under ash? Would a mortal's heartfelt prayer be heard? Or would it dissolve into the silent ether, unanswered? The gods were not bound by human logic. They were deities, after all. And if their actions sometimes seemed inconsistent or even whimsical, that was their true nature. The world they ruled was unpredictable, and its celestial masters reflected that unpredictability in full measure. From their high thrones veiled in eternal clouds, the gods observed the affairs of mortals, showing varying degrees of interest, from complete indifference to deep, at times destructive involvement. They watched, judged, laughed at human follies, sometimes shed tears, and occasionally interfered, often with dramatic and far-reaching consequences. The boundary between gods and mortals, as is known, was not so rigid and insurmountable in the ancient Greek worldview. The gods were not distant, abstract entities, inaccessible to understanding. On the contrary, they were close, familiar, filled with turbulent emotions. They could take human form, walk among people, fall in love, or, more often, succumb to uncontrollable lust, giving birth to heroes whose destiny was to slay monsters and wage wars. Their children became demigods, whose lives were undoubtedly extraordinary, but, alas, rarely long. But Olympus itself was something different. It was the sacred place to which the gods always returned, their secure refuge, soaring above the chaos and turmoil of the mortal world. One can imagine, if you will, the moment after a storm subsides, when heavy clouds disperse, returning a golden glow, and a blessed silence descends upon the peaks. Such was Olympus, not a realm of absolute perfection, but rather a divine respite, a moment of peace amidst eternal movement. It was the only true constant in a world where nothing else could last forever. Now, let's turn our attention to the company that resided on this sacred mountain. The 12 Olympians are often mentioned, but their exact list was never absolutely fixed. Traditionally, it included Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Hephaestus, Aphrodite, Hermes, and depending on the context, either Dionysus or Hestia. Notably, Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, was sometimes excluded from this brilliant circle, but one can safely assume that she didn't mind at all. She always seemed like a being who would prefer a quiet, cozy evening by the fire to a noisy, lightning-throwing competition among her brothers. Each of these gods brought something utterly unique to the divine assembly. Apollo, radiant and refined, was unimaginable without his lyre or another enigmatic prophecy. Artemis, vigilant and swift, remained eternally elusive among the dense forests. Ares, muscular and audacious, was the kind of guest who would eat all the olives and carelessly break the furniture at a feast. Aphrodite, woven from soft glances and dangerously persuasive silence, captivated hearts. And of course, Hermes, the cunning trickster, a smirk always playing on his face, as if to say he had already managed to snatch someone's sandals. They were gods, undeniably, but in spirit, undeniably human. This, perhaps, was the true genius of ancient Greek mythology. Its deities reflected humanity in all its brilliance and all its vivid flaws. The Hellenes erected temples in their honor, magnificent structures with columns soaring into the heavens, sanctuaries filled with incense and fervent prayers. But they also told stories. Myths were passed from mouth to mouth, from cozy campfires to grand amphitheaters. These were tales of love and betrayal, of pride and revenge, stories that taught, warned, and of course, entertained. Olympus was not just a place lost among the clouds. It was a magnificent theatrical stage, an epic family drama, a mirror of the human soul, elevated to a truly cosmic scale. And what about the mortals who gazed with reverence at this unattainable peak? They knew perfectly well that they would never see it. Olympus was shrouded not only in dense clouds but also in an impenetrable veil of mystery. No human was destined to reach it. And those who dared to attempt such a feat, like the Titan Atlas, forced to eternally bear the celestial vault on his shoulders, often paid a terrifying price for their immoderate ambitions. Olympus was a place for dreams, for the flight of imagination, not for physical ascent, and they did indeed imagine it, especially the great poets. Homer, in his immortal works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, filled Olympus with gleaming halls and thunderous divine disputes. Hesiod endowed it with majesty, structure, and a detailed genealogy of the gods. Later playwrights brought irony to the image of Olympus philosophers. Doubt, but invariably, Olympus remained serene, radiant, and gently detached from earthly concerns. Today, this mountain still majestically stands. Modern people, of course, hike it, equipped with sturdy boots, trail mix, and GPS systems. They reach the summit, and from a bird's-eye view see the land stretching in all directions, the Aegean Sea shimmering in the distance, and the fields below appearing like faded mosaics. However, they find no ancient temples there, only the pervasive wind, the boundless sky, and a subtle sense of something incredibly ancient, quietly observing the world. The gods perhaps no longer dwell on these heights, but their stories undoubtedly linger in the air, permeating every stone and every gust of wind. And perhaps as the sun slowly descends behind the rocky peaks and shadows deepen like old rich wine, one can close their eyes and faintly discern a distant sound of laughter, carried by the light breeze. The sound of a harp, an echo of a voice, an unseen divine step, something that has not entirely vanished. Thus the time has come to leave the sacred expanses of Olympus, treading lightly and with a tranquil heart. The divine inhabitants have already gathered at their opulent table. Torches, like living fires, illuminate their feast, and above the golden halls, countless stars have begun to timidly twinkle. Traveller, allow yourself peaceful sleep. From now on you are in worthy and safe company. This evening let's begin with the distant rumble of thunder. However, this is not the menacing roar that heralds an approaching storm, far from it. This sound resonates slowly and majestically, like a measured drumbeat from celestial heights, accompanied by flashes of lightning that seem more like a grand theatrical display than harbingers of danger. For it is known that, when appearing to the world, Zeus always prefers to surround himself with a fitting, impressive atmosphere. Before us stands Zeus, the undisputed king of the gods, ruler of Olympus, the almighty lord of thunder, rain, and guardian of heavenly order. Notably, he is also known as one of the most challenging figures in family relationships in all of mythology, which, given the composition of his divine entourage, speaks volumes. However, setting aside his many scandals for now, let us turn to his traditional image. As he was once revered by the ancient Greeks, he sits high on his majestic throne, located at the very summit of Olympus, clad in flowing white and golden robes. In one hand rests a royal scepter, in the other a lightning bolt ready to be hurled, and on his face is an expression balancing between stern, unyielding authority and a light, sometimes distracted, amusement. The air around him vibrates with concentrated divine power, for he is not merely a monarch, he is the living embodiment of law, order, and in most cases, harmonious cosmic balance. Zeus's ascent to Olympus was not the result of random luck or simple fortune. His saga begins in deep antiquity, in an era preceding the erection of the first temples, the appearance of poets, or even the most modest prayers. As the son of the mighty titans Cronus and Rhea, Zeus was the sixth, the youngest of their offspring, and the only one to escape immediate consumption after his birth. That's right, consumption. Cronus, their father, had a rather disturbing habit of devouring his own children, driven by the fear of being overthrown by one of them. Such a parental approach typically leads to close scrutiny and inclusion on undesirable lists. However, Rhea, displaying cunning and maternal wit, carried the newborn Zeus away and deceived Cronus by giving him a stone, wrapped in swaddling clothes, which he, rather clumsily, swallowed whole. Meanwhile, Zeus grew up in secret, hidden in a cave on the island of Crete. He was raised by caring nymphs, nursed on the milk of the magical goat Amalthea, and protected by divine warriors who rhythmically clashed their spears to drown out his infant cries. It was, without a doubt, a very unusual and noisy childhood, but it proved to be extremely effective. When Zeus reached maturity, he did what any ambitious hero whose fate was foretold by prophecy would do. He returned, cunningly forced Cronus to regurgitate his siblings, and then led the great divine rebellion known through the ages as the Titanomachy. For 10 long years, the younger gods, the future Olympians, fiercely fought against the old order until Zeus hurled his final, decisive lightning bolt, definitively securing their triumph. The Titans were cast down into gloomy Tartarus, a kind of divine prison, and thus Olympus was conquered and a new world order established. Thus Zeus established himself as king. His power was obtained not by right of primogeniture, but through extraordinary cunning, unparalleled courage, and, it must be admitted, a special talent for creating dramatic moments. As the supreme ruler, Zeus was far more than just a nominal head. He, of course, governed the heavens, but his influence also extended to the upholding of oaths, the laws of hospitality, and the administration of justice. Anyone who dared to break a sacred promise feared Zeus's inevitable retribution. When a stranger knocked on the door, they were offered food and shelter in Zeus's name. In many respects, he represented the divine connective tissue of society, the one who held the entire world order together, even if his own divine family was often on the brink of chaos. Now, with your permission, let's make a small digression, for any discussion of Zeus's personality would be incomplete without mentioning his, shall we say, extensive romantic adventures. Zeus, it must be admitted, had a rather wandering eye, and was prone to inconstancy, sometimes even taking the form of various animals for his purposes. His numerous liaisons with both mortal women and a whole host of goddesses form a vast catalogue of ancient myths. At times he appeared before them as a handsome man, sometimes he took the form of a swan, a mighty bull, or even a shower of gold. Well, clearly, any means were fair game. These unions gave rise to many of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. Heracles, Perseus, Helen of Troy, Minos, and many others. Each was born of different mothers. Each was destined for a unique fate. And each became like a small but significant stitch in the magnificent tapestry of Zeus's legacy, though perhaps not quite the legacy Hera, his lawful wife, had envisioned. Ah yes, Hera, queen of the gods, patroness of marriage, and the long-suffering spouse of the most prolific of all Olympian philanderers. Their union, however immortal, could hardly be called serene. Hera was distinguished by royal dignity, a sharp mind, and fierce pride. Zeus, for his part, loved her in his own way, yet this did not prevent him from constantly testing her patience. If anyone has ever been at a family dinner where no one dares to mention the elephant in the room, and then Zeus himself turns into that very elephant, they probably begin to grasp the full depth of the situation. Their quarrels were undoubtedly legendary. At times, Hera attempted to outwit or even overthrow her husband. Once, she even organized a rebellion among the Olympians, and Zeus had to be rescued by a 100-handed giant, known as Briareus. Another time, as punishment, he hung her from the sky in golden chains. Not his best move, of course, but ultimately they always reconciled, or at least reached some semblance of a détente. After all, immortality is an incredibly long time. One simply gets used to some things. Nevertheless, Zeus's story is not solely about mischief and lightning bolts. He also served as the supreme arbiter of cosmic balance. When mortals committed misdeeds or acted with hubris, that dangerous combination of arrogance and defiant disobedience, it was Zeus who delivered the final judgment. He sent omens, he summoned the Furies, he struck down the proud with his celestial might, but at the same time he generously rewarded virtue. He upheld the sacred bonds of hospitality between host and guest, and he listened to prayers. The ancient Greeks saw him as a mighty anchor of divine power. His image adorned temples, coins, and countless statues throughout the ancient world, in Olympia. Itself, in the great temple, sat a colossal statue of Zeus, crafted from gold and ivory, the work of the great sculptor Phidias, recognized as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. He was not merely a character in myths. He was the foundation of an entire cultural identity. And yet, for all his divinity, there's something deeply human about him, isn't there? For all his formidable power and majesty, Zeus often behaved like an exasperated father trying his best to keep his house full of eccentric children from burning to the ground in a storm. He actively intervened in the political machinations of Troy. He weighed the fates of heroes on battlefields. He tried, often in vain, to maintain some semblance of order among the inhabitants of Olympus. It was a true divine soap opera, with Zeus serving as both director and reluctant leading man. He could show mercy, as when he forgave Prometheus after centuries of cruel punishment for bringing fire to humanity. And he could be ruthlessly vengeful, as when he flooded the entire earth to cleanse it of human wickedness. But above all, Zeus was consistent in one thing. He tirelessly reminded mortals of the limits of their reach. In myths, those who dared to defy him, be they colossal giants or powerful kings, almost always met defeat. And this wasn't necessarily due to Zeus's personal hatred, but because the natural order of the cosmos had to be preserved. And order was what Zeus valued above all else. In the world that came after the overthrow of the Titans, the universe ceased to be a realm of chaos and primordial darkness. It found its rhythm, its changing seasons, its clear laws. Stars rotated in their orbits in the heavens. Rains came and went. Cities rose and fell, but the heavens remained immutable. And somewhere high above it all, Zeus watched tirelessly. Now, of course, it's easy to dismiss him as merely a tyrant armed with a lightning bolt. But I find myself drawn to the idea of him as a figure far more multifaceted. A deity who carried on his mighty shoulders the heavy burden of the world's unpredictability. One who served as the linchpin between the mortal realm and the boundless unknown beyond it. One who sometimes roared in anger, sometimes perhaps wept in despair, and raged not out of inherent cruelty, but because the world abounded with complex choices, and none of them were ever simple. Even gods, it turns out, had their unbearable burdens. So when we mentally picture him, let his gaze reflect not only boundless power, but also a deep, hidden weariness. For though he was the supreme king, his reign never knew true peace. There was always a new hero whose fate required tireless observation, a new war whose outcome needed to be decided, a new prophecy to ponder. And all the while the world around him changed. Winds blew in different directions, clouds gathered in anticipation of new events, and somewhere far below, among mortals, a poet quietly whispered his name. Today's thunder comes from afar, and the heavens are calm. Zeus, it seems, reclines in his majestic hall, where the firelight plays on his golden crown, and the world, for a brief moment, has found serenity. Stars twinkle high overhead, like ancient all-seeing eyes, and Mount Olympus itself breathes its slow, eternal rhythm. Rest now, you are under the vigilant yet merciful gaze of the King of Olympus, and today he is benevolent. Make yourself comfortable. The lamps are dimmed, the fire in the hearth crackles softly, and tonight our gaze turns to Hera, the majestic queen of the gods. You have already had the honor of meeting her husband, Zeus, in all his thunderous, shape-shifting splendor. But Hera is something entirely different, unique. She is not a ruler of the heavens, nor a commander of storms or prophecies, but rather the quiet, unwavering heart of Olympus itself. And more than once, she has been the source of that piercing glance, capable of turning a lesser deity to stone, or, at the very least, sending them scurrying to some forgotten temple in Thessaly. She was and remains the goddess of marriage, patroness of women, childbirth, and the embodiment of regal dignity. However, Hera is far from being merely a keeper of the domestic hearth. She does not possess the gentleness of a spring breeze. She is fierce, extraordinarily resilient, possesses a sharp mind, and is more than capable of expressing her profound displeasure, especially when it comes to her husband's numerous infidelities. But we shall return to that topic in due course. So, let's begin at the very beginning. With her birth, which occurred long before Olympus was established as the abode of the gods, Hera came into the world as the daughter of the Titans Cronus and Rhea. Yes, that same Cronus, who was known for his rather disturbing habit of devouring his own children whole. Hera, like her siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hades, and Poseidon, disappeared into her father's belly until Zeus, the youngest and most cunning of them all, accomplished their rescue. Usually, the process of rebirth is not associated with an act of digestion, but mythology rarely burdens itself with such subtleties. When mighty Zeus rose, freeing his siblings and overthrowing the old world order, Hera reappeared before the world. Despite being younger than her brother and husband, such is the nature of ancient myths, the goddess quickly established herself not only as his lawful consort, but also as his equal in divine power. She was not merely Zeus's wife. She was the full and crowned queen of Olympus. How did they meet? Zeus, as was his custom, pursued Hera with all the directness and power of a thunderstorm. However, Hera, possessing a sharp mind and foresight, did not succumb to his advances so easily. She steadfastly rejected his courtship, maintaining her distance until he resorted to one of his most unusual tactics of seduction. Taking the form of a helpless cuckoo, he flung himself into her lap, trembling and pitiful. Moved by compassion, Hera gently caressed the bird, whereupon Zeus instantly returned to his true form and, in classic divine fashion, caught her off. God. By modern standards, this can hardly be called romantic, but in the world of myths, it was tantamount to a true love sonnet. Their marriage, nevertheless, was far from idyllic. Hera, herself the goddess of marriage, found herself bound to a spouse whose fidelity was as unreliable as a chariot with only one wheel. Zeus's numerous liaisons with mortal women, nymphs, and even other goddesses became the stuff of legend and a source of deep tragedy. Each time he broke his marital vow, Hera responded not with silence or submission. Her response was vengeance, deliberate, precise, and often deeply poetic. But let's be fair, Hera's wrath was not blind fury. It was rooted in self-respect, in a deep understanding of what was right, sacred, and just. She did not lash out at offenders without good reason. When she exacted punishment, she did so with the calm assurance of a queen, striving to maintain order in a realm that seemed steadily to descend into chaos. Consider, for example, the story of Io, a mortal priestess desired by Zeus. When Hera took notice, Zeus, panicked, transformed Io into a white heifer. Hera, of course, easily saw through this bovine disguise. She accepted the gift, the cow, with feigned graciousness and appointed Argus, a giant with 100 eyes, as her vigilant guard. It wasn't the most subtle move, but it was highly effective. Zeus, in despair, sent Hermes to lull Argus to sleep with his stories and music. And as soon as all 100 eyes closed, Hermes took the giant's life. Hera was furious. She took the cow Io and transferred Argus's many eyes to the tail of her sacred bird, the peacock. This detail, incidentally, remains in the bird's plumage to this day. This is what sets Hera apart. She did not forget. She immortalized. She took grievances and carved them into the stars, into feathers, into stone, not out of malice, but out of principle. Her world was one of order, and when that order was disrupted, she responded accordingly. Another tale, this time involving Heracles, one of Zeus's many sons born to another woman. Hera hated him from the moment he drew his first breath. She sent snakes into his cradle. She drove him to madness. She put obstacles in his path at every turn. And yet, in an irony almost too perfect, it was Heracles who, after his death, was welcomed to Olympus and reconciled with Hera, even marrying her daughter Hebe. One can only imagine how tense those family dinners must have been. However, Hera was not merely an angry wife. Such a portrayal simplifies her image and is unfair. She was the goddess to whom women prayed for safe childbirth, for a strong home, for the sacred bonds of marriage to remain unbroken. She was the protector and patroness of queens. Her temples were among the most magnificent in all of Greece, especially the famous Heraion near Argos, where priestesses performed intricate rituals and dedicated their lives to her. She was also the embodiment of regal majesty. When Homer describes her in the Iliad, it is done with a special, almost reverent awe, tall, proud, golden-eyed. She sits in a chariot drawn by peacocks, a crown sparkling on her head, radiating celestial fire, and her voice is capable of silencing a room full of immortals. Even Zeus, for all his bluster, knew perfectly well when to tread carefully in Hera's presence. Their marriage, for all its numerous squabbles, was also a political alliance, symbolizing cosmic balance. Zeus embodied raw power and law, while Hera represented fidelity, structure, and sacred traditions. Together they ruled not only Olympus, but the entire universe of the Greek cosmos. Their quarrels were undoubtedly mythical, but they also reflected the eternal struggle between freedom and fidelity, chaos and order, impulse and restraint. To worship her was not to bow before gentleness. It was to honor strength clothed in dignity. It was to recognize that the world needs not only storms but also established boundaries, that love is not always sweet. Sometimes it is fierce, wounded, yet incredibly resilient. Sometimes it grits its teeth and carries on for something greater than the self. She also had moments of compassion. She aided Jason and the Argonauts. She protected women in childbirth. She gave strength to those who championed justice. In some myths, she appears as a maternal figure, not soft, but firm. The kind of mother who might not kiss your scraped knee, but would stand between you and a charging bull without flinching. In art, she is almost always depicted as majestic. She sits enthroned with a scepter in one hand and a staff topped with a lotus or pomegranate in the other. The pomegranate, as you may recall, is a symbol of fertility and the life cycle, often found in ancient depictions of divine royalty. Among her sacred animals, besides the peacock, is also the cow, not only for its gentleness, but also for its association with nurturing and steadfastness. There is a reason the Romans called her Juno, and elevated her to the chief goddess of their pantheon. The archetype of Hera, the divine matron, both revered and awe-inspiring, resonates across many cultures. She is not a goddess who fades with time. She is one who endures it. And so we picture her now, seated in her shining hall, high above the clouds, where the golden light of Olympus softly falls upon her brow. Peacocks gracefully step at her feet. The fires crackle softly. A divine scroll lies beside her. Perhaps it's a new list of grievances, or a wedding invitation, or perhaps both. The gods around her argue and bicker, laugh and sulk, but Hera remains still, vigilant. She doesn't always speak first, but when she does, all of Olympus listens. Tonight, her gaze is calm. Her court is quiet. Somewhere in the mortal world a marriage is taking place. A child is born. A vow is kept. And the Queen of the Heavens is at peace. For now. Sleep now, traveller. You rest beneath her watchful eyes. And she never forgets. The sea still holds a certain ancient silence, a deep, breathing presence beneath its surface. It is never entirely still, never fully asleep, and in that eternal blue, long before sailors navigated by stars or merchants dreamed of distant shores, the ancient Greeks believed something older, something powerful, proud, and at times quite quarrelsome stirred there. Poseidon, brother of Zeus and Hades, was the god of the sea. Earthquakes, horses, and, most importantly, grudges. While Zeus ruled the heavens and Hades reigned below, Poseidon laid claim to everything that foamed, surged, boiled, and crashed against the shores. The sea, after all, for the ancient Greeks, was not merely a body of water. It was a force, an insurmountable boundary, a mysterious abyss, and Poseidon was its undisputed master. Imagine him now, tall, muscular, bearded like a storm-worn king with hair tangled with salt and seaweed, a trident gleaming with the wet sheen of dawn tides. He does not float above the clouds like his brother. He races across the wave crests, pulled by hippocampi, these mythical seahorses with hooves of foam and manes like river reeds. When he speaks, it sounds like the low rumble of shifting tectonic plates beneath your feet. He is the voice of the ocean floor, ancient, thundering, and not particularly patient. His realm is immense, encompassing not only the boundless sea itself, but also every bay, every spring, and every underground stream. Sailors offered him prayers before long voyages. Fishermen whispered his name over their nets. Even those who lived on land, far from the coast, feared his wrath. Earthquakes, which the Greeks called Poseidon shaking the earth, were attributed to him. You may recall he's not one to knock politely when displeased. Like his brothers, Poseidon began his journey in darkness, swallowed like the rest of his siblings by Cronus, and then freed by Zeus. After the Titanomachy, the great war against the old gods, the world was divided. Zeus took the sky. Hades received the underworld. Poseidon was given the sea, and not as a consolation prize, mind you, but as a dominion equal in grandeur and terror. And to be fair, it suited him perfectly. Poseidon's nature was, shall we say, volatile. On some days he was a benevolent god, granting calm winds, safely guiding ships home, and bringing fresh water from parched land. On other days, quite the opposite. He could whip the sea into a frenzy, unleash monstrous waves upon unsuspecting shores, and summon sea monsters vast enough to feast on entire cities. He wasn't cruel, just temperamental. The sea, after all, both gives and takes. And so did he. One of Poseidon's most famous displays of wrath was directed at the city known today as Athens. The fact is, Poseidon himself and his niece Athena both sought to become its patron deity. The Olympian gods set up a contest. Each deity was to present a gift, and the city's inhabitants would choose whom to honor. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, bringing forth a spring, but unfortunately, the water was salty, which was not very useful for a landlocked city. Athena, in turn, offered the olive tree, an eternal symbol of peace, abundance, and highly valuable for cooking. The Athenians, always pragmatic, chose her gift. Poseidon, in his classic manner, took the defeat with undisguised indignation. In a fit of revenge, he unleashed floods upon parts of the land, and though passions eventually subsided, it was clear he did not take losing gracefully. His relationships, like his anger, were tempestuous and unpredictable. He married the sea goddess Amphitrite, one of the 50 beautiful Nereids. Initially, she tried to avoid his insistent advances, which included significant pursuit and even assistance from a dolphin. Yes, really. But eventually she agreed to the union, and they formed, by Olympian standards, a fairly solid family unit. Their son Triton was a merman who often appeared with a conch shell, which he blew to calm or stir the waves. Nevertheless, Poseidon was not known for marital fidelity. His list of lovers and offspring could rival Zeus's, encompassing mortal women, nymphs, and even creations of his own will. Among his most celebrated progeny is the winged steed Pegasus, who sprang from the severed neck of Medusa after Poseidon, rather unceremoniously, pursued her in Athena's sacred temple. There was also Polyphemus the Cyclops, who notably crossed paths with Odysseus, but that story will be told later. Poseidon's power extended boundlessly, but it was not always met with due respect, especially from heroes who should have exercised greater foresight. Take, for example, Odysseus. By blinding Polyphemus during his long journey home from Troy, he made a fatal error by taunting the Cyclops, whose father, of course, was Poseidon himself. This turned what should have been a 10-day voyage into a 10-year odyssey, filled with shipwrecks, treacherous sirens, and angry deities. The moral of the story is simple: never anger the one who rules your sea voyages. And yet Poseidon also served as an architect. He participated in the construction of the walls of Troy. However, when the ruler refused to pay him the promised fee, Poseidon ensured that the city would inevitably be doomed. And again, we return to the question of divine memory. The Olympians, and Poseidon in particular, had long memories and an even keener sense of retribution when they felt insulted. Worship of Poseidon was widely practiced in coastal areas. The Isthmus of Corinth was home to one of his most significant sanctuaries, a majestic structure where sailors and seafarers offered prayers and gifts for safe passage. Horses were considered sacred animals to him, both mythical seahorses and ordinary earthly steeds. Legends said that he created the first horse by striking the ground with his trident. In some myths, he is even credited with teaching humans how to tame and use their power. This served as a reminder that Poseidon, though possessing an untamed nature, could show generosity when properly honored. But the sea was not just a geographical concept. For the ancient Greeks, it was an animated entity. It served as a link between lands, preserved and spread myth, swallowed entire empires, and Poseidon was its embodied voice, always unpredictable, yet invariably omniscient. His temple was open to the winds, his statues gazed into the boundless distance to the horizon. The sea belonged to him entirely, as did all the space above it. He was also actively involved in the myths of the origin of many islands. Greek mythology is full of stories of Poseidon raising new land masses from the depths of the sea, or splitting them apart in fits of divine fury. It was said that the island of Delos, sacred to Apollo and Artemis, once wandered freely through the waters of the Aegean Sea until Poseidon fixed it in place forever. There were also times when he created new lands, new shores emerging, serving as visible evidence of his boundless power. At festivals, Poseidon's worshippers did not always approach him with gentle pleas. Sacrifices were often made with a deep sense of fear mixed with reverent awe. In some coastal areas, entire horses were driven into the sea as offerings, not out of cruelty, but because, it was believed, Poseidon's insatiability was commensurate with the vastness of his domain. He was not a demigod, nor was he a gentle deity. He represented a primordial, elemental force. Even the Romans, who called him Neptune, retained a similar conception of the mighty lord of the seas. His image continued to live through centuries and empires, carved in stone and stamped on coins, serving as a guide for ships, long after belief in him faded. The sea, after all, does not so easily forget its ancient god. Today we can imagine him in his underwater abode, built of coral and pearls. The walls of his palace shimmer with light filtering through meters of ocean depth. Sea nymphs glide past silently, like shadows. Triton's conch echoes faintly in distant caves. Poseidon himself sits on his throne, made of stone and shells, gazing upon his immense domain, silent, yet never fully at rest. He rarely speaks, but when he does, the waters respond. Perhaps he contemplates the mortals who ply the waters above his realm, their sails filled with borrowed wind, their ships no more than fragile shells on the abyssal deep. Perhaps he allows them to pass unhindered, or perhaps he sends a gentle ripple, merely as a reminder of his unseen presence. This deity was not cruel, but neither was he forgetful. He embodies the sea itself, vast, changeable, fundamental. He is the god of both storms and serene stillness. And for the Greeks, he was not to be loved blindly, but to be revered unconditionally. Thus, tonight, as one drifts into the world of dreams, let the rhythmic beat of the waves lull the mind. The ocean has its stories, ancient and passed down through the ages. And far below, Poseidon is at rest, not sleeping, but listening. May your sleep be peaceful. The sea is calm today, and that is his will. Beneath the world we know, under the deep roots of mountains and the ever-drifting ocean floor, lies a place whose antiquity surpasses memory itself, shrouded in a darkness deeper than night, and more silent than time. It is not a realm of flame, though later ages would ascribe that image to it. And it is not a prison. It is simply what inevitably follows life. The ancient Greeks called it the underworld, and in its silent heart sits Hades, lord of the dead. Hades, firstborn of Cronus and Rhea, did not sit on shining Olympus. He did not hurl thunderbolts or stir the oceans. His power did not manifest in flashes. It existed constantly, unchangeably. When the universe was divided among the three mighty brothers after the crushing defeat of the Titans, Zeus drew the celestial expanses, Poseidon received the watery domains, and Hades stoically accepted the lands beneath the surface. Some thought he drew the short straw. Others claimed it was his conscious choice. In truth, Hades never needed grand displays to assert his dominion. He simply was it. He is the deity of silence, not the silence that is the absence of sound or an act of cruelty, but the one that is the very essence of peace and non-being. In myths, he rarely raises his voice or boasts. His actions are measured and full of significance. Mortals feared him, it is true, but they also held him in deep respect. Not because he was the bringer of death, for he was not, but because he accepted it, because all paths eventually lead to his realm. His kingdom stretched immensely, layered like the branching root system of a giant tree. The souls of the deceased arrive there guided by Hermes, who carefully directs them into the depths. At the very threshold, Charon, the gloomy ferryman, awaits, relentlessly demanding his fee. It was this tradition that led the ancient Greeks to place obols in the mouths of their deceased. To be without the proper payment meant to be condemned to eternal wandering along the gloomy banks of the Styx, unheard and unmourned shadows. And the Styx is just one of many sacred rivers. There is Acheron, the river of woe, Cocytus, the river of lamentation, Phlegethon, whose fiery water burns but does not consume, and Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, whose waters plunge the mind into sleepy oblivion. Each of these rivers marked not just a geographical transition, but a deep symbolic meaning. They do not flow through earthly geography. They flow through memory itself, through the depths of fear and through the glimmer of hope. The dead are judged by three venerable kings of antiquity, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. Most souls are directed to the asphodel meadows, where they drift serenely in peace, unremarkable and undisturbed. Those who were wicked are cast into Tartarus, into that deepest abyss, where their punishment is commensurate with their misdeeds. And only a few, the most noble of mortals, ascend to Elysium, a realm of music, gentle sunlight, and soft breezes, where even after death, virtuous souls can breathe freely. This realm is under the tireless management of Hades. He governs it not through flame, but through strict order. He is not cruel, but neither is he kind. He simply ensures that everything proceeds as it should, that every soul is received, remembered, and assigned its place. And in this lay its own special dignity. And yet, despite all this, his image is often subjected to distorted interpretations. In works of art and in narratives, he is sometimes mistakenly portrayed as a villain. Perhaps this is because death itself inspires terror, and he is its silent face. But Hades is no more evil than the force of gravity. He does not pursue souls. He does not tempt or torment. He patiently and eternally rules over the inevitable. The most famous myth associated with him is, without a doubt, the narrative of Persephone. This story begins under the sun's rays amidst fragrant flowers. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, was gathering wildflowers when the earth beneath her feet suddenly split open. Hades ascended in his obsidian chariot and carried her into the depths, beneath the very roots of the world. Demeter searched for her daughter throughout the land, refusing to let the earth bear fruit until her daughter returned. And so, finally, a compromise was reached. Persephone was to spend a certain part of the year on the surface with her mother, and another part below, with her husband. Thus the changing seasons came into being, spring and summer marked by joy, while autumn and winter by sorrow. Was it an act of love, or an act of will? The myths differ on this point. But in the underworld, Persephone attained the status of queen. She was not a captive, not merely a consort, but a full-fledged ruler. She sat beside Hades, not behind him. She guided the dead past the place of judgment, tended the pale gardens of shadows. And Hades, he did not rage. He did not betray. In all the stories, he is perhaps the only deity who does not stray or falter. His kingdom was enough for him. His crown was enough. His queen was enough. He is often called Pluto, meaning the rich one, and not without reason, for all the treasures hidden in the earth's depths belong to him. Gold and silver, precious gems and seeds hidden in the soil, all are under his dominion. From him come not only endings, but also the origins of all things. Seeds must dwell in impenetrable darkness before they can sprout and give life, and Hades presides over this primordial gloom. He rarely appeared among the other Olympian gods. When he did, it was always for good reason. For example, he lent his support in the grand war against the giants. He also lent his helm of darkness to the hero Perseus, who cleverly used it to escape after slaying the formidable Medusa. However, he mostly preferred to remain aloof from the hustle and bustle of the upper world, merely observing, waiting, and tirelessly managing his vast domains. His unseen presence was felt in solemn rites of mourning, in the subtle rustle of funeral offerings, in the profound silence that follows the last breath. Sacrifices to Hades were performed exclusively at night, using black animals, and the smoke from libations was directed strictly downwards, towards the earth. His name was spoken only in whispers, and sometimes avoided altogether, for to invoke him meant to draw his watchful gaze, and this, it was believed, was a heavy burden for any mortal. And yet, not all felt an overwhelming fear of him. In ancient Eleusis, his name was an integral part of the great mysteries, which promised initiates, rebirth, and new life. In Orphic traditions, he was perceived not as the end of all things, but rather as a gatekeeper leading to the next beginning. Some even firmly believed in the endless cycles of life and death, in the continuous wheel of reincarnation. And in this philosophy, Hades appeared not as an impregnable wall, but as a welcoming door, opening the way to new possibilities. Imagine him now, if you wish, seated on a majestic throne carved from volcanic rock, surrounded by deep shadow, his garments falling in quiet, silent folds. Around him the faint shimmer of long-departed souls, murmuring conversations that only the dead can understand. Beside him, in her own special place, Persephone tends a wondrous garden of pale flowers, blooming without a single ray of sun. The air carries a delicate, subtle scent of myrrh and ancient memories. In his hand he holds a scepter, not to strike, but to denote unshakable order. The dead do not rise. They need no chains or fetters. The insurmountable weight of time itself holds them in their rightful place. Unlike his boisterous brothers, Hades never craved earthly or divine glory. He did not envy the grandeur of Olympus. He did not interfere in the fleeting affairs of mortals, unless they dared to trespass into his domains without permission, and even then he acted more as an impartial judge than a ruthless executioner. He set strict conditions and meticulously ensured their observance. Recall the story of Orpheus, who descended into the underworld to plead for the return of his beloved Eurydice. Hades listened carefully to his request. He agreed, granting the poet a chance to lead her back up, but set one single inviolable condition: not to look back. And when Orpheus violated that condition, Hades took no more than what was rightfully his. No deception, just inexorable rules. In a world where even gods could be petty and capricious, Hades remained a paragon of consistency and fairness. Perhaps that is why, despite all his detachment, he was trusted. Feared, yes, but also trusted. And so the ancient Greeks always lived with the thought of him, not in terror, but in deep recognition of his role. They meticulously built tombs, they left offerings, they scrupulously remembered the names of the deceased, because to be remembered meant to linger a little longer in the world above. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you have no need to fear the god below. He does not lurk in your shadow. He merely watches over those who have already left the earthly abode. He cares for a realm not of fire and torment, but of deep memory. He sits in silence, because he has nothing left to prove to this world. Sleep now peacefully. May the earth gently embrace you in its arms. May your thoughts float like light leaves on the waters of the mythical Acheron. May the serene silence of this tranquil realm lull you. Hades waits, but not for you. Not yet. He merely waits patiently as the world turns, and he will always wait. They say she wasn't born in the usual way, but from a fierce, truly unbearable headache. Zeus, as the ancient story goes, swallowed her mother, Meti, the goddess of wisdom, because it was prophesied that she would bear a child more powerful than he. Problem solved, he likely thought then. But divine digestion rarely means the end of a story in Greek myths. One day Zeus began to suffer from a tormenting, excruciating pain in his skull. The gods gathered around him, offering various solutions. Eventually Hephaestus, ever the practical one, struck Zeus's head with an axe, and from his head sprang Athena, fully grown and fully armed, with a spear in one hand and a shield in the other, letting out a war cry that echoed throughout Olympus. A truly dramatic entrance, even by divine standards. Athena, goddess of wisdom, military strategy, crafts, and reason, arrived not as a helpless child, but as a mature idea embodied in flesh, collected, calm, and already thinking 3 steps ahead. She wore a helmet, carried Zeus's aegis, and from her very first breath, commanded respect from both gods and mortals. Her presence on Olympus was quite special. Unlike many of her peers, Athena was not known for tumultuous love affairs or dramatic squabbles driven by vanity, though she wasn't entirely above such things. She was measured, demanding, and highly devoted to logic. In a realm where passion and raw power often reigned, she was the embodiment of principle and order. Yet she was not cold or unfeeling. She simply always saw the long-term perspective. Cities and civilizations revered her. The most famous of them, of course, Athens itself, took her name. The contest between Athena and Poseidon for patronage of that city is one of those stories that reveals as much about Greek values as it does about the gods themselves. Poseidon, being who he was, offered a grand gift. He struck the earth with his trident and produced a spring of salt water, or, in some versions, a warhorse. Either way, it was impressive, but not terribly useful for a rocky inland city. Athena, ever pragmatic, planted an olive tree. Shade, food, oil, and timber, all from one single gift. The Athenians chose her, and frankly, who wouldn't? From then on, Athena became more than just a goddess to them. She was the guardian of their identity, their sense of civic pride, their pursuit of reason, art, and just warfare. Her temple, the Parthenon, still crowns the Acropolis. Its majestic columns gaze out over the Aegean Sea like marble sentinels. It remains not just a relic of ancient architecture, but an enduring testament to her spirit. Athena's approach to war was utterly unlike the bloodlust and madness of Ares. She favored tactics, careful planning, the application of intellect to conflict. She represented reason in battle, not blind frenzy. She advised heroes, rather than charging into the fray herself. Odysseus, in particular, earned her special favor. His cunning, his resourcefulness, his talent for preferring words over weapons, these were all qualities she valued above all else. She guided him home through storms and hardships, always remaining the voice of reason, whispering beneath the chaos. But wisdom is not always gentle. Athena could be uncompromising, and when offended, her anger was cold and long-lasting. Take the story of Arachne, a mortal weaver whose skill was so great that she dared to claim superiority over the goddess herself. Athena, not known for indulging hubris, challenged her to a contest. Arachne's tapestry was flawless. It even dared to depict the gods in their less flattering guises. Athena, though impressed by the skill, tore it to shreds. She struck Arachne, but in a rare moment of mercy, or perhaps poetic judgment, transformed her into the first spider, condemning her to weave forever. This balance of pride and precision defined Athena. She upheld honor, but never hesitated to assert her place. She did not shout. She did not scheme. She simply stood her ground, and others yielded. She was also the patroness of crafts and inventions. Pottery, weaving, architecture, all fell under her keen guidance. She inspired not only warriors but also skilled artisans, wise philosophers, and just lawmakers. Her symbol, the owl, denoted clarity of mind and was stamped on the coins of Athens. Wherever thinking hands shaped the world, Athena was invisibly present. Artists spoke her name before carving marble. Statesmen offered silent prayers before debating laws. Curiously, she remained a virgin goddess, not out of prudishness, but out of deep independence. She did not marry. She did not pursue or allow herself to be pursued. Her loyalty lay in principle, not in passion. This gave her a certain clarity, an imperturbability, untouched by the usual romantic intrigues that entangled her peers. She stood alone, and from that solitude came her unwavering strength. Even her friends knew to tread carefully. When Tiresias, the blind prophet, accidentally saw her bathing, Athena struck him blind. But, to be fair, she also granted him the gift of prophecy to balance the scales. Firm but fair, such was her consistent path. In art, Athena is almost always depicted armed, but never aggressive. Her shield often bore the head of Medusa, a grim gift from Perseus after his fateful feat. According to some traditions, she aided him, guiding his hand, giving him tools, whispering words of courage. But her choice to place Medusa's face on her shield was more than just a trophy. Perhaps it was a warning, or a reminder that wisdom does not shy away from horror. It absorbs it, reflects it, uses it for its own purposes. Athena had many temples throughout the Greek world. Besides the Parthenon, sanctuaries in places like Delphi and Sparta revered her many aspects. The warrior, the lawgiver, the protector. Festivals like the Pantheon celebrated her birth and her vital role in civic life, combining athletic contests, sacrifices, and solemn parades of woven garments made in her honor. In one such ritual, young women carried offerings in silence, their steps measured, their robes flowing like water beneath the olive trees. The numerous epithets bestowed upon the goddess eloquently attest to the breadth of her influence and the multifaceted nature of her being. Athena Parthenos, meaning virgin. Athena Polias. Of the city, Athena Promachos. Champion in battle, Athena Ergan. Industrious, and finally, Athena Nike, bringer of victory. She embodied many aspects of existence, yet she was never distant or inaccessible. Even in the most ancient myths, Athena appears as a goddess who, more often than other celestials, walked alongside mortals, addressing them directly and guiding them without the slightest hint of condescension. She possessed a unique ability to discern hidden potential where most saw only flaws. Her assistance was expressed in wise guidance, not empty flattery, in demanding expectation, not in indulging weaknesses. Of course, there were certain contradictions in her image. She tirelessly advocated for justice, yet remained silent when her fellow gods acted from far from noble motives. She severely punished women who dared to transgress established boundaries, but at the same time granted heroes unyielding strength to boldly challenge fate itself. Perhaps this was her profound wisdom, the ability to precisely determine when to act and when to wait. Not every injustice required immediate and thunderous condemnation. Some could only be corrected over time, through silence and deep foresight. Athena always possessed incredible foresight. Her voice rarely sounded loud, but when she did choose to raise it, it was the sound of clear, undeniable judgment, like the clang of bronze on bronze in the still air before a decisive battle, a single note that could not be ignored. Her instructions were often imbued with calm warnings, softly spoken truths. In divine assemblies, the gods could argue fiercely for hours, but when Athena spoke, a deep silence fell upon the hall. Her logical arguments were extremely difficult to refute, and her authoritative presence impossible to dismiss. Imagine her now, seated on her marble throne high in the majestic halls of Olympus. Her gaze is cold and calm, scanning the scrolls that hold the records of mortal deeds. She rarely smiles at anyone, but when she does, it is the smile of one who sees not so much perfection as inexhaustible potential. Her faithful owl sits silently beside her, and beyond the palace, the stars perform their precise, inexorable march. Every movement in the heavens seems to reflect her own mind, residing below, quiet, deliberate, unchanging. Somewhere below, a child diligently learns to write. A potter skillfully turns his wheel. A general makes marks on a map. A philosopher pauses mid-thought, trying to unravel the source of a sudden insight. And in all of this, Athena comes alive. She may not be the brightest of the gods nor the loudest, but it is her name whispered in libraries and courtrooms, in military headquarters and workshops. She is wisdom itself, embodied in bronze. And so tonight, as people close their eyes and drift into the world of dreams, they should know that she is awake, not in thunder or consuming fire, but in thought, in structure, in the unwavering strength of what is built correctly and firmly. Let them sleep now, and if they dream, let it be of olive groves and marble halls, clear skies and firm, skilled hands. Athena is always near, and she continues to ponder. In the gentle glow before dawn, when the world seems to pause and the heavens waver between silver and gold, two mythological figures begin their movement. They are twins, born of the same mother, destined to follow entirely different paths, under the same ancient skies. Apollo and Artemis, sunlight and moonlight, brother and sister, both opposites and echoes of each other. They came into the world on the sacred island of Delos, a place that, according to legend, once drifted freely in the sea until it anchored itself precisely at the moment to shelter their mother, Leto. Hera, always consumed by vengeance and highly disapproving of Zeus's numerous love affairs, forbade any land from receiving Leto while she was pregnant. Delos, being unrooted and wild, was not subject to such prohibitions, and so on this moving land, under the curious gaze of the heavens, Leto first gave birth to Artemis, and then to Apollo. From their very birth they were extraordinary children. Artemis, as the myth tells, helped her brother come into the world, and thus became the goddess of childbirth and the patroness of young creatures. Apollo, radiant and golden, was born second, but quickly became the embodiment of light, music, poetry, prophecy, and the art of healing. Such an impressive list of gifts could make even Hermes blink. They were inseparable, yet utterly distinct. Artemis chose the wild, forests, mountains, nocturnal creatures. She roamed with a bow and a pack of hounds, remaining untouched by civilization and men. A true virgin goddess. Her strength lay in independence and her power in detachment. She guarded liminal spaces, twilight, wild corners of nature, the boundary between states. Apollo, by contrast, preferred the center, the sunlight, the lyre, the temple steps warm from the afternoon sun. He embodied order and clarity, truth spoken through oracles, the measured rhythm of poetry, the clean lines of sculpture. Where Artemis glided silently beneath the tree canopy, Apollo strode confidently through the squares, head held high, every step a measured rhythm. And yet they remained mirrors of each other. Where he brought the day, she painted the night. Where he offered reason, she held mystery. They did not oppose each other, but completed a single circle of being. Apollo's most famous sanctuary was located in Delphi, where the Pythia oracle sat on a tripod and uttered his prophecies, often couched in riddles that skillfully wove fate and free will into a single, unbreakable thread. Pilgrims from all over the Greek world flocked there to ask their questions and receive these enigmatic answers. And although at times the answers could be maddeningly vague, Apollo's true gift lay not in simplicity, but in profound insight. He was also an incomparable musician. His lyre, given to him by Hermes as an apology for a rather audacious cattle theft, became a symbol of celestial harmony. With it he could calm storms, soothe troubled minds, and sway hearts. His songs were not just entertainment. They represented structure, soul, the cosmos clothed in melody. But Apollo was not solely a god of light. His stories, like those of all Olympians, carry shadows. He loved often and with catastrophic consequences. Daphne, a nymph who fled from him, was transformed into a laurel tree to escape his pursuit. Coronis, whom he loved, betrayed him, and he killed her to save their unborn child, Asclepius, the future god of medicine. His wrath was precise and merciless, and his grief prolonged. Artemis also had her shadowy sides. She severely punished those who saw her without her consent. Actaeon, a hunter, accidentally stumbled upon her bathing and was turned into a stag, then torn apart by his own hounds. She was fiercely protective, unyielding in her expectations, yet showed kindness to those who honored her solitude. She guarded the vulnerable, accompanied maidens, bestowed her strength upon women in childbirth, and was invoked in the quiet of moonlit prayers. Unlike her brother, Artemis did not engage in city building. Her temples were often deep in forests or located on inaccessible mountain paths. She preferred the company of nymphs, wild animals, and the stars. And yet, her cult was extraordinarily widespread. From Ephesus to Brauron, from Arcadia to Sicily, girls danced in her honor, leaving their childhood names in rites of passage that whispered of a coming transformation. Together, Apollo and Artemis represented something more than just light and dark. They were a pair of divine principles, reason and intuition, civilization and wilderness, speech and silence, the bow that brings the hunt and the lyre that brings healing. And always, always they remained brother and sister, never rivals, never strangers to each other. One story tells of the Gigantomachy, the great battle between the gods and the giants. In it, Apollo and Artemis fought side by side. He struck down enemies with arrows of burning gold, she with arrows cold as silver. Together they vanquished opponents who were far mightier than themselves. Their aim was unwavering, and their cause righteous. Sun and moon fought as one. Another myth tells of the tragic demise of Niobe's children. Niobe, a queen, mocked Leto for having only 2 children, while she herself had many. Enraged by the insults, Artemis and Apollo took their bows. One by one they struck down Niobe's children, he the sons, she the daughters. Only one child, in some versions of the myth, was spared. Niobe fled, weeping inconsolably, and was turned into a stone from which a waterfall of endless sorrow eternally flowed. The lesson, though grim, was clear. One should not mock the mother of light and shadow. And yet these myths were not merely warnings. They served as mirrors, held up to the human heart, demonstrating how passion, loyalty, and power manifest in forms that transcend ordinary life. Through these stories, the Greeks explored the very fabric of human emotions. Apollo, the god of healing, was also the god of plague. One note from his bow could bring disease, another, restoration. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, was both a giver of life and a bringer of death to animals. They held paradox in their palms, like a bowstring drawn taut between extremes. In historical context, their cult formed a significant part of Greek religious life. In Delphi, Apollo's oracle determined political decisions, sea voyages, and even the declaration of wars. The Delian League took its name from his birthplace. Athletes swore oaths in his name before the Pythian Games, held every 4 years in his honor. Artemis, meanwhile, was a central figure in coming-of-age rites. In Brauron, girls approaching womanhood participated in rituals where they dressed in bear skins, echoing Artemis's role as a guardian of transitions. Her sanctuary in Ephesus, with its enormous temple and statues adorned with symbols of fertility and wilderness, was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Romans also revered these gods. Apollo retained his name, a rare instance of continuity. Artemis became Diana, and her image continued to wander through moonlit groves, wild and untouched. In artistic representations, Apollo appears as a youthful, beardless deity, often holding a lyre or a bow. His face exudes serenity, and his posture is characterized by inimitable grace. He embodies the ideal, balance, elegance, and absolute harmony. Artemis, on the other hand, manifests as swift and confident. Her garments billow in motion, and her gaze is sharp, like a silver arrow tip. In her, one senses both the silence of the thicket and the sudden snap of a broken branch. Imagine them now, standing shoulder to shoulder at the edge of the world. Apollo once again raises the sun, and the celestial vault is bathed in golden light. Birds begin to stir, their gentle songs warming the air. Behind him Artemis lowers the moon, hiding it in shadow. The stars let out a quiet sigh. A deer steps silently through the fog, and between them, the world awakens from sleep. They do not exchange words, for there is no need. This dance they have performed since the beginning of time. Apollo gazes eastward, where the day waits with open arms. Artemis turns westward, into the deep silence of the forests. And for a moment their paths converge, light and darkness, brother and sister. Now allow yourself to sleep. Let the moonlight be your guide into the realm of dreams. Let the last golden echoes of Apollo's lyre gradually dissolve into the approaching silence. The divine twins keep their watch, and the world remains in balance for now. Make yourselves comfortable. Let the roar of battles subside, and the clang of hammers become a faint echo. Tonight we turn our attention to two gods so distinct in their essence that they are rarely mentioned on the same page. And yet, here they are, side by side in our dreams. One embodies fury with a sword, the other fire with a purpose. These are Ares and Hephaestus, the god of war and the god of the forge. Together they paint a curious picture of masculinity in ancient Greece. One is pure force and blood, the other limping yet immensely gifted. And if the myths are to be believed, which we very much hope they are before sleep, the Olympian family didn't quite know what to do with either of them. Ares, son of Zeus and Hera, was the embodiment of raw, primal brutality. This was not the tactical warfare of generals, not the calculated strategy of Athena. No, Ares was the thundering heart of battle, the rising scream, the blind charge into chaos. The Greeks called him Ares, and while they acknowledged what he represented, they weren't too keen on inviting him to dinner parties. Even Zeus, his own father, mind you, was famously not fond of him. In Homer's Iliad, Zeus calls Ares the most hateful of all gods, and that was hardly a playful jab over a glass of wine. Ares represented the kind of war that ravaged fields and shattered cities for no apparent reason. He revelled in the clang of bronze on bronze, the frightened neighing of horses, the dying cries of men. His companions were equally appealing. Phobos, fear, Deimos, terror, and Eris, discord. They followed him into battle like an entourage no mortal would dare invite to a feast. And yet, for all his ferocity, Ares wasn't particularly successful. He suffered defeats. Once he was locked in a jar for months by two mortal sons of Poseidon. Yes, the god of war, confined like pickled olives. It makes one wonder if the Greeks were quietly chuckling at him. But contrast Ares with how the Romans perceived him. Mars, as they called him, was revered, respected, worshipped with parades. While the Greeks treated Ares with caution, the Romans embraced him as a symbol of disciplined might and empire. A curious shift, perhaps reflecting the values of a rising military power versus a culture that preferred wit, reason, and afternoon philosophy in the shade. Nevertheless, there's something almost endearing about Ares. He's openly passionate. He falls in love. And oh, how he falls head over heels for Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. And what a pair they made, she radiant and cunning, he straightforward and smitten. Their affair, though not a secret, lacked subtlety. They were caught in the act by Hephaestus, her husband, who snared them in a net of his own making. Now, this brings us to our second god tonight, to the quiet, simmering power of the forge. Hephaestus, the divine smith, son of Hera, and, depending on your preference, possibly fatherless altogether. Some claim Hera birthed him alone in retaliation for Zeus producing Athena from his head. Such is Olympian parenting, equal parts marvel and petty. But Hephaestus was born lame, and in the glittering company of gods where beauty and power were expected, he distinctly stood out. Myths diverge here. In one, Hera throws him from Olympus in disgust. In another, Zeus does so. After a disagreement. Either way, the poor fellow was cast from the clouds, falling into the sea, where he was nursed by kind sea nymphs. Well, that would make for a rather awkward family reunion, wouldn't it? But Hephaestus didn't wallow in eternal sorrow. He learned. He created. In time he returned to Olympus, not with anger, but with unmatched skill. And what skill it was! He crafted thrones, automatons, bronze palaces. He forged Achilles' shield, so intricate that poets had to pause and describe it for hundreds of lines. He fashioned Pandora, the first woman, crafted so artfully that she was irresistible. Hephaestus is, simply put, the patron of all invention, and not just swords and armor, but every tool, every spark of progress shaped by human hands. Where Ares is destruction, Hephaestus is creation through flame. The hammer and anvil become his altar. The ancients recognized this. He had cults throughout Greece, especially in Athens and on Lemnos, a volcanic island that was considered his earthly home. There the fires were sacred, and every smith was a kind of priest, mirroring their divine patron in sweat and soot. In Athens, Hephaestus shared a temple with Athena, a pairing that was not romantic but symbolic. She brought wisdom. He brought the means to enact it. Craftsmanship and ingenuity side by side. And yet, for all his brilliance, Hephaestus rarely wins in the myths. His marriage to Aphrodite is unfaithful. His traps are ingenious, but rarely save him from loneliness. He is mighty, but not worshipped for his looks or charm. Thus, he is one of the most understandable gods, not cloaked in glory, but toiling in the shadows, forging the world while others fight over it. And perhaps that's the secret. Because the Greeks, for all their love of myths, were quite practical. They built, they reasoned, they debated in the agora, and laid stones perfectly straight. While Ares might shout and brandish a sword, Hephaestus quietly forged the hinge it swung on. Nevertheless, they are both part of the same divine family, and one can imagine that dinners on Olympus were, well, quite something. Imagine Ares boasting of a battlefield bathed in glory, while Hephaestus frowns over a burn mark on his latest sculpture. Hera sighs. Apollo plucks a disapproving string. Dionysus fills everyone's cups. Aphrodite checks her reflection in a polished shield. And somewhere in the background, Hermes quietly chuckles. But behind the myth lies something ancient and instructive. These two gods represent a duality every civilization faces. Force and function, chaos and craftsmanship, the fire that burns and the fire that creates. One must remember that war, though often glorified in poetry, was a terrifying reality. The Greeks were no strangers to conflict. hoplite battles, city-state skirmishes, Persian invasions. They saw what war could do, and perhaps that's why Ares was kept at arm's length, a necessary force, but by no means an honoured guest. In contrast, Hephaestus's tools were present in every facet of life. The plough, the spear, the loom's axle, the temple's columns, all echoed his forge. To praise him was to praise civilization itself. In vase paintings and sculpture, Hephaestus is often depicted with muscular arms, a sooty face, and a short working tunic. He doesn't glow with ethereal light. He sweats, he bends metal, he limps with a purpose. Ares, on the other hand, is all sharp lines and bronze gleam, a plumed helmet, shield at the ready, chin held just so. His beauty is as carefully forged as his sword, but somehow always less reliable. And so the Greeks taught their children, strength alone is not enough. Build, create, work with your hands, let fire warm, not consume. Yet perhaps Ares had to exist, if only to remind us how precious peace is. And Hephaestus, for all his trials, remained indispensable. Even the gods needed a smith. As we drift into silence, consider the forge, softly glowing in the night, surrounded by tools, unfinished wonders, and the smell of warm metal. No shouting, no clanging of spears, just the quiet fire and the slow rhythm of the hammer. Perhaps the heart of Olympus was not in the throne room, but in the forge below, and somewhere, deep in the mountain halls, a god with a limp and a mind of steel continues to shape the world, while far above, the god of war sharpens his blade, just in case. Let the sparks die down now. One by one the fires fade, the clang of iron stills, and the gods, forever imperfect, fall silent as sleep approaches. Close your eyes and let the rules of the waking world loosen their grip. Tonight we drift with the tricksters, those who cross boundaries, blur identities, and chuckle when the map doesn't quite match the terrain. We step off the polished marble steps of Olympus and wander down an ivy-covered path that smells faintly of wine, wildflowers, and something a little illicit. These are the gods of transition, of thresholds, of masks, of mischief, and of mystery. Dionysus and Hermes. One pours the wine, the other steals your sandals, and together they lead us to the edges of what it means to be human. Let's begin with Dionysus. While he's often thought of as simply the god of wine, which he certainly is, his essence stretches far beyond that. He embodies liberation, madness, and ecstasy, symbolizing a complete letting go. In him is the paradox of ivy, a plant both comforting and terrifying. His origins, as befits a deity of such magnitude, are shrouded in complex lore. Some myths tell that he was born from Semele, a mortal princess, and Zeus, who, in his usual fashion, visited her in secret. But Semele, tricked by a jealous Hera, wished to see Zeus in all his divine glory. Mortals, it turns out, cannot withstand the power of thunder. She perished in flames, but Zeus, with divine midwifery, rescued the unborn Dionysus and sewed him into his thigh. Yes, that's not a mistake. Dionysus was reborn from Zeus's leg. Perhaps not the most elegant way to enter the world, but it certainly leaves an impression. From the moment of his second birth, Dionysus existed between worlds, mortal and divine, Greek and foreign, male and female, sane and mad. He wandered the earth, growing up, and wherever he trod, grapevines sprang from the soil. Panthers accompanied his journey. Women, known as maenads, danced barefoot in the forests, seized by his presence. Yet, behind this joy, there was always a shadow of danger. For Dionysus is not just the god of wine. He is the very essence of what makes wine. He is the one who reveals what a person truly is, or what they desperately try not to be. For the ancient Greeks, Dionysus represented the side of life that burst through established structures. He was worshipped in ecstatic rites, sometimes performed at night, deep in forest clearings. The Orphic mysteries and Bacchic festivals offered initiates a chance to momentarily shed personal identity, gender, social status, and obligations, allowing them to taste the freedom of dissolution into one. These rites were not always peaceful. Pentheus, the proud king of Thebes, tried to suppress Dionysus's cult. The god, disguised as a humble priest, lured him to observe the women's rituals. In the end, Pentheus was torn apart, literally, by his own mother, driven to madness by the deity's power. And yet Dionysus was not evil. He represented a balance. His arrival marked the end of winter. He came after loss, symbolizing the return of vitality. The wild joy he offered reminded people of their living existence. And despite all the chaos he brought, Dionysus was loved. Temples were built in his honor. Theaters were constructed for him. The Dionysia festival in Athens became the birthplace of both tragedy and comedy. It was a sacred celebration of storytelling, masks, and human emotion. For theatre, like Dionysus himself, balances on the edge between illusion and truth. Now, let's leave the forest and follow the flutter of wings. Or is it just the rustle of sandals on marble? It's Hermes. If Dionysus teaches us how to lose control, Hermes shows us how to navigate it. The messenger god, the guide of souls, the trickster with a smirk that hints he's already stolen what you're looking for. Hermes is the god of transitions, travel, trade, invention, and thievery. He's the protector of boundaries and the one who slips through them with ease. Born in a cave, he was walking and stealing before his first day was out. One of his first acts was to steal Apollo's cattle. And he didn't just steal them, he cleverly disguised his tracks by walking backward and creating sandals from bark. By sunset, he'd invented the lyre, made from a tortoise shell and gut strings, and charmed his way out of punishment by offering it as a gift to Apollo. Such is Hermes, quick, clever, and disarming enough to avoid retribution. However, he's not just a prankster. Hermes played a vital role in Greek religion. He was the psychopomp, the guide of souls, the one who led the dead to the underworld. He didn't judge, he didn't punish, he simply escorted, a quiet presence at the moment of death, not feared or worshipped too loudly, but always necessary. For the ancients he was present at crossroads, at the boundaries between fields, at liminal places where magic happened. Travellers left him offerings in the form of herms, stone pillars topped with his head, often with an anatomically prominent addition carved just below. They stood as guardians of movement, fertility, and bold reminders of divine presence in everyday life. Hermes was also the god of merchants, trade, negotiation, and yes, sometimes trickery. But in the ancient world, that was part of the game. Trade was considered sacred, and Hermes, ever adaptable, was both its protector and its jester. He pops up everywhere, on coins, in plays, in dreams. the flash of winged sandals across the sky. And here's where it gets particularly interesting, because while Dionysus and Hermes are not often directly linked in myths, they are spiritual kin. Both are boundary deities. Both connect opposites, life and death, mortal and divine, order and chaos. They are gods of change. And in the ancient world, change was to be respected, even feared, because it reminded people that the line between the civilized and the wild is thinner than we like to admit. In some Orphic traditions, Dionysus is associated with the rebirth of the soul, torn apart by the Titans and reborn in fire. Hermes, meanwhile, appears in esoteric texts as the guardian of hidden knowledge, later merging with the Egyptian Thoth to become Hermes Trismegistus, the father of alchemy and the mystic arts. Between them, these two gods whisper a strange truth, that transformation is divine, that the in-between is sacred. The Greeks understood this. Their myths weren't meant for strict consistency. They were meant to reflect life, messy, contradictory, and beautifully uncertain. And so, when Dionysus's festival was held, with its masks and madness, it wasn't just about wine. It was about freedom, about feeling for one night that the world could bend, and just maybe you could let go. And when a traveller stepped onto the road, uncertain where it led, a prayer to Hermes wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was about protection in the unknown, a little luck, a little cunning, a little mischief, just enough to make the journey interesting. In art they appear in vivid contrast. Dionysus is ivy-crowned, with robes falling from his shoulders, holding a wine cup or a thyrsus, a staff entwined with grapevines and topped with a pine cone. His gaze is distant, ecstatic, as if he watches something only initiates can see. Hermes is slender, athletic, with wings on his cap, on his sandals, sometimes even on his ankles. He holds the caduceus, a staff with two snakes entwined, which began as a symbol of negotiation, and later, quite curiously, became a symbol of modern medicine. Together they tell us that not all gods are warriors or rulers. Some are wanderers. Some dance in the dark. Some laugh at locked doors and pass through them anyway. And for the Greeks, this was a comfort, that even in uncertainty, even in death or madness or stolen cattle, there were gods who understood. Gods who would walk with you, laugh with you, guide you. So now, as breath slows and thoughts soften, like twilight on the Aegean Sea, picture them, Dionysus in a clearing, where music plays softly, surrounded by flickering torches and dancers who need no names. Hermes on the road just ahead, a knowing look on his face, a coin in his pocket, ready to walk with you to the next chapter, wherever it may be. The vines settle, the wind stills, the road grows silent, and the two divine mischief-makers quietly fade into dreams. The hearth, the tomb, and the quiet gods at the world's centre. Take a deep breath and slowly exhale. We have journeyed with warriors, dined with tricksters, stood under storm clouds and danced through vineyards. But now, in this final chapter, we come to a quiet place, a place of stillness and presence, not absence, but the kind of silence you find when you come home and close the door behind you. Tonight we visit two of the most unobtrusive gods in the Olympian family, Hestia and Hades. They don't seek attention, they don't interfere, chase mortals, or throw weapons across the sky. In fact, they rarely leave their posts at all. One keeps the fire in every home, the other watches over every soul. They are constancy and return, the beginning and the end. And despite the myths focusing on the louder, flashier figures, without them, the entire divine order would simply crumble. Let's begin with Hestia. She is the eldest of the Olympians, the firstborn of the Titans Cronus and Rhea, and the first to be swallowed whole by her father. A charming family, these Titans. You might recall that Cronus, paranoid about being overthrown, decided the best course of action was to eat his children. Hestia, being the eldest, went first. When Zeus eventually forced Cronus to regurgitate his siblings with the help of a rather aggressive herbal tonic, Hestia was the last to emerge. And so she was both the firstborn and the last freed, making her, rather poetically, the Alpha and Omega of the Olympian order. And yet, for all that drama, Hestia is perhaps the least dramatic deity of them all. She doesn't rage, she doesn't seduce or scheme, she doesn't even go on adventures. Instead, she simply remains. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth, the sacred fire at the center of every Greek home, temple, and city. The hearth wasn't just a place to warm your hands or cook lentils. It was the spiritual anchor of life. Families gathered around it. Offerings were made at it. Prayers began and ended in its flickering light. In every Greek home, Hestia's flame was a quiet promise that no matter how tumultuous the outside world became, there would always be a place, however small, of warmth, safety, and belonging. She never married. Many, including powerful gods like Poseidon and Apollo, did indeed seek her favor, but she, with her characteristic grace and courtesy, rejected their advances. Instead, she took a sacred vow of eternal virginity and silently continued her tireless service, tending to the hearth flame. When the time came to allocate the 12 Olympian thrones, she, showing remarkable self-abnegation, stepped aside, yielding her place to Dionysus, the youngest of the gods. She made no fuss, expressed no displeasure. She simply consciously chose the center, not the summit. And it was in this core that she became the most unchanging and constant presence in all of Greek life. In significant poleis like Athens, Hestia's sacred flame burned in the Prytaneum, where the public hearth was maintained with the utmost reverence. When a new colony was founded, live fire was taken from this central hearth and carried across the seas so that the new settlement could begin its history under Hestia's blessing. Thus she invisibly linked the old world to the new, passing on this unity one glowing ember at a time. No grand temples were built for her, for every home was, in essence, her sanctuary. Her name was not sung in epic poems, for her story was not a chronicle of conquests or destructive calamities. She simply existed, embodying the very foundation of being. It was she who made every ritual, every offering, and every domestic hearth possible. Even at the beginning of any public or private sacrifice, the Greeks first invoked Hestia. Before the meat was laid on the altar, before the libation was poured, Hestia was already there. And at the very end, when the last drop of wine was spilled and the smoke rose to the sky, she was there again. To the modern mind, this might seem a humble presence, but for the ancient Greeks, It was reverence of the highest order. If Athena was the mind of the city, and Artemis its wild, untamed spaces, Hestia was its unseen yet vital heart, quietly beating, never drawing attention, yet always present. Now let's shift from the warm hearth to the depths of the earth, to another god who also rarely spoke, but whose power extended far wider than most could imagine. Hades, lord of the underworld, was another child of Cronus and Rhea. He too was swallowed by his father and subsequently rescued by Zeus. When the war against the Titans concluded with the Olympians' victory, the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, cast lots to divide the cosmos among themselves. Zeus drew the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades drew the lot of the underworld. It's important to clarify here. He was not deposed. He was not a loser. He simply received a duty no one else wanted, accepting it quietly, responsibly, and without a single complaint. This is precisely why he often remained misunderstood. In later eras, particularly in Roman and Christian retellings of the myths, Hades was transformed into a demonic figure. However, for the Greeks, he was not the embodiment of evil. He was inevitability, part of the natural order of things. His realm was not hell in the conventional sense. It was simply the natural destination for every mortal soul. For them, Hades appeared as a somber but dignified ruler. Strict, certainly, but not cruel. In fact, he is one of the few gods who never cheated on his wife or interfered in mortal affairs just for amusement. His name means the unseen, and his famous helm of darkness allowed him to move imperceptibly even among the gods. It was a very fitting symbol for a deity whose work was constant, but remained invisible to the living. He ruled the underworld with justice and order. He did not allow the shades of the dead to wander aimlessly, and ensured that every soul received what was due to it, whether in the joyless asphodel meadows, in the blessed fields of Elysium, or in the dark depths of Tartarus for those who were truly wicked. He was feared, yes, but that fear could be deeply respectful. In fact, people generally avoided speaking his name aloud. Euphemisms, such as Pluto, meaning giver of wealth, became common. After all the treasures of the earth, gold, silver, harvests, stability itself, came from beneath the ground. Hades, under this other guise, was not a god of doom, but a god of hidden riches. And then there is Persephone, queen of the underworld, equal to Hades in title and power. The myth of her is well known. Hades falls in love with Persephone and abducts her to his realm. Her mother, Demeter, goddess of the harvest, plunges into grief, and the earth withers. Eventually, an agreement is reached. Persephone will spend part of the year with Hades, and another part with her mother. Thus the seasons came to be: spring, when she returns, and winter, when she departs. It's easy to imagine Persephone as a victim of circumstances. However, in older versions of the myth, connected to mystery cults, she appears as a powerful figure, chosen, even desiring her fate. A queen not only by name but by her role, she was the guide of the dead and a bridge between life and the afterlife. And Hades remains faithful to his wife. Unlike Zeus and Poseidon, he has no wandering eye, no scandalous stories. His love, though strange in its form, is unique in its devotion. This subtle stability was recognized and revered in cultic practice. In Eleusis, initiates in the mysteries learned the sacred secrets of death, return, and rebirth. And central to all of it was Hades, not a tormentor, but a keeper, a god who ensured that nothing was ever truly lost, but merely transformed. So, in this final chapter, we find something curious. The Olympian family is full of movement, wars, passions, laughter, and rage. But at both ends, framing the myths like candles on an altar, are two figures who do not chase glory, do not flee fate, but simply hold balance. Hestia, at the center of the home, Hades, at the center of the earth. One keeps the fire of life, the other receives the flame when it goes out. And neither boasts, though they invisibly touch every moment of human existence. From the first breath at the cradle to the last breath at the tombstone, Hestia and Hades are present. In art, they are depicted quietly. Hestia is usually veiled, seated, serene, a modest woman holding a flame. Hades, often bearded and reserved, sits with Persephone, sometimes with a cornucopia, a reminder that what lies below nourishes what grows above. And perhaps this is the lesson the Greeks left us, that glory is not always loud, that power is not always paraded, that the greatest forces in life are those that simply endure and preserve. So now let the fire burn dim, let the earth cradle your thoughts. In one corner of the hearth, a flame flickers, constant, undisturbed by wind or time. Far below, in quiet stone halls, a king walks the corridors of memory, unwavering and patient. And among all that we are, may Hestia guard your dreams, may Hades guard your peace, and may sleep gently envelop you where the gods who stayed home still keep their eternal watch.